Welcome back to Leadership Rehearsal. I'm Alex, and I'm so glad you're here. Last week, we built out our one-on-one structure. We talked about how the one-on-one isn't a status update, it's your most intentional individual leadership time, and how you use it to see your people, not just the work they're producing. One of the most important things you can use this time for is performance. Not the formal performance review, but the everyday progress. This helps us move away from performance feeling like an event. Instead of working for 11 months and then in month 12 finding out how you did, you want to move towards regular conversations about how the person is progressing and catching things early. This allows people a moment to course correct if needed rather than being surprised. Performance is a conversation, an ongoing one. And the good news is you already have the tools to have it. You have your one-on-ones, you have the expectation setting framework from episode 5, you have eyes on the work every single day. Well, today we're going to talk about what do you do with all of that? How to read performance in real time, what performance actually means, and a framework for root causing, one that works best when paired with the right conversation. Let's dive into rehearsal. Let's start at the beginning by defining what we mean by performance, because it's one of those terms that gets used constantly and we all have different understandings of what it means. In a work context, performance has two dimensions. The first is the what someone accomplished. In episode 5, we talked about setting expectations around outcomes, what done actually looks like, what the deliverables are, when things will be reviewed. That's all the what. And when assessing this dimension, you're basically asking, to what degree were they able to accomplish it? Did they meet the expectations or goals that were set? The second dimension is the how they did the work. These are the behaviors. Are they maintaining a safe environment within the team? If your organization has values or pillars, this is usually where they get folded in. For example, if your company values collaboration, you'll look to see whether the team member collaborated effectively when completing their work. The how is just as important as the what, maybe more. Here's why. Research from Harvard Business Review has consistently found that high-performing teams aren't just defined by output, they're defined by how team members treat each other and operate together. Culture and behavior are half of what makes up performance. As we discussed in episode 4 on psychological safety, people do their best work when they feel safe to do so. Now, why does this distinction matter for you as a leader? Well, it's because oftentimes leaders focus mainly on the what. They are more concerned with output and pay less attention to how the work is completed. And it's usually because output is easier to measure than behavior. Or is it? Let's meet Jordan. Jordan is, by every traditional metric, a reliable performer. He delivers on time, he meets all of his deliverables, and if you looked at that alone, you'd think, I have nothing to worry about. Well, two things can be true at once. In team meetings, Jordan also talks over people who disagree with him. His colleagues have stopped sharing ideas when he's present because they've learned they won't be able to finish, and two of your stronger team members have come to you separately and said they really dread collaborating with him. So, why is this a concern if Jordan is meeting all of his deliverables? Well, if you only reward the what, you send a signal to your team that the how doesn't matter, that results absolve you from your behavior. And once that signal lands, your team culture shifts. You lose the psychological safety you've spent time building, you lose quieter contributors because they don't feel safe, and you lose trust. And trust, as we talked about in episode 2, is the foundation everything else is built on. This is how avoiding performance conversations undermines the culture you've been building. Jordan's situation is a performance concern. It just doesn't show up when it comes to metrics. And finding out what's actually driving it requires a conversation and curiosity around what is actually going on below the surface. We've established that performance has two dimensions, the what and the how. Now, let's get to the management part. Managing performance is not saved only for poor performers or when things have reached a boiling point. Managing performance is an everyday thing. Think of it as performance monitoring, where you are actively noticing and naming what you observe, good and not so good. When someone does great work, you recognize them. That is part of managing performance because you're rewarding behaviors and outputs that have an impact. Providing feedback is also part of managing performance because you're bringing things to the forefront before they turn into a real concern. Coaching, growth conversations, as you guessed, these are all part of managing performance. And by avoiding these, we make the end of the year performance review feel like the only performance conversation, and that's why it feels so daunting and stressful. Now, what happens when you identify a potential performance concern? Your instinct might be to reach for a solution, but here's what I've learned and had to practice. The presenting concern is almost never the real issue. Even in Jordan's case, what you're observing is a symptom, and if you treat the symptom without understanding what's underneath it, you'll fix the wrong thing or you'll fix nothing at all. This is where root causing comes in, and I found that using the 5 whys method in the context of performance is really helpful. The 5 Whys was developed by Sakishi Toyota, and apologies if I butchered that. And his work laid the foundation for the Toyota production system, and it was a way to make sure that problems got solved at their source and didn't repeat themselves. The premise is straightforward. When you identify a problem, you don't just ask what happened, you ask why. And then you ask why again, but directed at the answer you just got. And you're going to do that 5 times, and by the 5th one, you've almost always reached the root. Why 5? Well, because 1 or 2 whys gives you the surface. 3 or 4 gets you closer, but usually not there, and more than 5 tends to pull you away from the actual issue into territory that's too granular to act on. 5 is the sweet spot. Here's an example. Let's say you have a team member who is falling behind on their work. That's the presenting issue. You could respond immediately by redistributing the work, setting tighter deadlines, having a performance conversation. But before you do that, ask why. Why are they falling behind? Their workload seems uneven. Well, why does the workload feel uneven? Reports are taking up about 75% of their time. Well, why are the reports taking so long? The details are taking long to parse through. Okay, why is parsing the data taking so long? They're not working through it efficiently. And why are they not working through it efficiently? Well, because they were never trained on how to use the reporting system correctly. There it is. The root cause is a training gap. And if you would have stopped at why number 1, uneven workload, you might have reshuffled their assignments and the problem would have come right back. If you would have stopped at why 3 or 4, you might have assumed that they were incapable and provided unnecessary feedback. You would have treated the wrong thing. With the root cause, the path becomes clearer. Get them trained and then build a plan together to work through the backlog before they drown. That is a very different conversation and solution than a performance warning. Now, I can already hear the questions. So, no, you don't do this by yourself like we just did. Yes, this is a conversation you'd have. And no, you don't literally ask why 5 times in a row. That would feel like an interrogation. The conversation instead is focused on what you've observed, them falling behind, and wanting to understand what is getting in the way and how you can support. During the conversation, you ask probing questions to go deeper based on what they share. As we covered last episode, you can only see the tip of the iceberg. You want to go below the waterline to really understand what's going on, and you do that through open-ended questions and probing. Frameworks like the 5 Whys are useful. They give you a way to organize your thinking before you walk into a conversation, but they don't replace the conversation. I've seen leaders use performance frameworks without ever talking to a team member, convince themselves they understand the situation, and then write a really awkward review based on that assumption alone. I've been on the receiving end of that, a review written from observation with no conversation in between. It does not build trust, it erodes it. Now, frameworks give you a hypothesis. The conversation is where you find out how accurate it is. The more safety you've created with your team and the more relationship capital you've built, the easier the conversations will be, because sometimes the team member already knows exactly what is getting in the way. They just have not been asked directly, or they don't feel safe enough to say it. So, before you go into that conversation with your hypothesis, and you should have one, hold it loosely. Get curious, not conclusive. Your job is not to present them with your root cause analysis. It's to ask enough of the right questions that you arrive at the root together. That is when real solutions happen and when you avoid real performance concerns. All right, the time has come for our solo rehearsal. As always, the worksheet is linked in the episode description. Grab it before you start. You can pause me and work through it in real time, or listen through and come back to it at the end. Either way, the decision is always yours. Okay, today's exercise is practicing root causing. Again, performance management is not a corrective tool. It is an everyday practice. And one of the most underused applications of root causing is understanding why something went really well so you can name it, build on it, and repeat it. So that is what we're going to focus on. Okay, step 1, pick one person. Identify one team member who has recently accomplished something that went really well. A project that landed, a deliverable that exceeded expectations, or maybe they just led their first meeting and it went amazing. Write their name and the specific win at the top of your worksheet. Step 2, assess the what. Look at what they accomplished. What was the outcome? How did it land against the expectations that were set? Write down 2 or 3 specific observations, things that you saw or measured, not general impressions. Now, be as specific as you can here. They did a great job is not an observation. They delivered the report 3 days early, or the stakeholder shared it was the easiest to read and make decisions from. That's an observation. Step 3, assess the how. Now look at the behavior layer. How did they show up in the progress of doing the work? How did they collaborate, communicate, and navigate it? Were there specific behaviors, the way they handled a difficult conversation, the way they kept others informed, the way they stayed calm under pressure that contributed to the outcome? Write down 2 or 3 specific behaviors. Step 4, build your hypothesis using the 5 whys. Now apply the 5 whys to the win on your own before you have the conversation. Using what you observed in steps 2 and 3, start with the outcome and ask why it went well. Direct each why toward the answer before it and keep going through all the 5 whys. You're not looking for a definitive answer. You're building a hypothesis, your best read on what actually drove this outcome based on what you know about this person and what you observed during the work. Maybe it was a skill they had been developing. Maybe it was a behavior that they modeled that created the right conditions for the team. Maybe it connects to a conversation you had in a one-on-one 3 months ago that had a bigger impact than you realized. Write down where the 5 whys land you. That is your hypothesis. Step 5, test your hypothesis. Now it's time for the conversation. Before your next one-on-one with this person, prepare what you're going to say. The goal is not to deliver your hypothesis as a conclusion. It is to recognize what you observed, share the specifics that stood out to you, and then open up the conversation by asking questions. Write down the specific recognition you want to give, grounded in the observable behaviors and outcome. Then write down 1 or 2 questions that invite them to reflect on what they think made this work. Then listen. You may hear exactly what your hypothesis surfaced. You may hear something that shifts it entirely. Either way, you walk away with a fuller picture, and they walk away knowing that you were paying attention to more than just the results. Okay, we have made it to the end and to our team rehearsal. As you know, it's going to be to have the conversation with your team member. And once you do, expand the practice across your whole team. When you're ready, do the same preparation for each team member. Look at what each person has done recently that went well, assess the what and the how, apply the 5 whys to build your hypothesis, then bring it to your one-on-ones. Talking about strengths and wins is just as important as addressing concerns. It provides a well-rounded look at how someone is performing. And when you're looking to make performance a regular conversation, starting with recognition is a great way to build the foundation towards more critical concerns when they arise. The goal is to make this casual and consistent, so your formal reviews become easier and more of a summary of the things you've been talking about throughout the year. Well, that's all I have for you this week. Coming up next, we're going to spend 2 episodes on feedback because yes, it does deserve that kind of attention. Episode 8 is all about how to build a culture of feedback on your team and some of the behaviors that we do that get in the way of that. Episode 9 goes deeper into how to deliver feedback effectively and do it in a way that is honest while preserving the other person's self-esteem. Both episodes build directly on everything we've covered up to this point, especially about performance, expectations, and psychological safety. If you enjoyed today's episode, subscribe so you don't miss future rehearsals. Follow us on Instagram @Leadership Rehearsal and share your questions or experiences in the comments. I'm Alex, and I'll see you at the next rehearsal. Bye.